in an attempt to set the record straight. Now, he rarely does these exclusive long-form interviews, given the nature of his current situation. Now, for 4.5 years, he has been confined at the Ecuadorian embassy, where he's not seen the light of day in all that time. So Assange, of course, he founded the group Wikileaks. That was back in 2006. And in the years following, he made international headlines after releasing hundreds of thousands of classified U.S. government documents. And in 2010, he was detained in England after Swedish officials issued an arrest warrant over allegations that he may have sexually assaulted 2 women. That is a charge which he will respond to later in this program tonight in this interview. Now, in 2012, he was granted asylum in the Ecuadorian embassy in the city of London. Now, he has been living there ever since in very, very confined, tiny quarters. So in this wide-ranging interview, which we will show for the entire hour tonight, Assange told me what drives him to expose government and media corruption. Take a look. Let me start with the American elections. And from your perspective, how big a role do you feel WikiLeaks had in the outcome of the election? You didn't think Donald Trump was going to win.
I didn't think Donald Trump would win. I thought the establishment, for want of a better word, would see Hillary Clinton losing, and then would pile in more money and more energy, and various TV networks are on her side, and make sure that she won. I think that analysis was still correct, but it missed something fundamental, which is that the amount of investment to the Hillary Clinton campaign was in proportion to the degree that the establishment thought that she would lose. And she was aggressively projecting that she would be the inevitable winner, and was above, 5-10 points in the opinion polling. So she only got $1.5 billion directed into her campaign. If they thought she was going to lose, maybe she would have gotten $5 billion. We'd see a different result.
It's very interesting post-election, and it didn't even really happen immediately, but the narrative has begun that, in fact, the U.S. government is accusing WikiLeaks of having received materials from Russia and Russia's cyber criminals with the political agenda of influencing the election. And obviously they're talking not just about the John Podesta emails, the DNC emails, but in other ways. I've asked you before, I'll ask you again today. Did Russia give you this information, or anybody associated with Russia?
Our source is not a state party. So the answer for our interactions is no. But if we look at the most recent statement by the US government, which is on the 29th of December, okay, we had 5 different branches of government, Treasury, DHS, FBI, White House, presenting their accusations to underpin Obama's throwing out 35 Russian diplomats. What was missing from all of those statements? The word WikiLeaks. It's very strange. Now, my interpretation is that there's either, not surprisingly, a problem they feel with the evidence as far as WikiLeaks is concerned. Well, James Clapper said, we don't know how WikiLeaks got this information, we don't know when WikiLeaks got this information. But let's imagine that they are saying, okay, the problem here is that WikiLeaks published information. Well, what are they saying? WikiLeaks published true information that the American public read. That information was the words of Hillary Clinton and her campaign manager, John Podesta, and other people in her campaign. And the American public read that information, true information, and said, we don't like these people. And then voted accordingly. But that's not sustainable. So what they want to do instead is conflate our publication of true information with, say, hacking, or rather alleged hacking, of US vote counting machines. And even Obama has had to admit that there has been no hacking of US vote counting machines. No evidence of that.
So, but the main focus for most Americans, they are being told by Hillary Clinton's campaign, by the President of the United States, there are the Department of Homeland Security, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, etc. that, in fact, WikiLeaks was working with the Russian government to influence the election. Is that true in any way, shape, matter, or form?
No, that's absolutely false. And if you read their statements carefully, you'll see they don't actually say that. They kind of mention one fact here and one fact there and nothing else. In the most up-to-date information, on the 29th of December, where the FBI, DHS, White House, etc. made a statement, what is completely absent from all those statements is WikiLeaks. Totally absent. So what's going on? Well, I believe two things are going on. Number one, they don't have the evidence that WikiLeaks is involved in that way. Now, why am I confident about that? Well, because there is one person in the world, and I think it's actually only one, who knows exactly what is going on with our publications, and that's me.
Can you say to the American people unequivocally that you did not get this information about the DNC, John Podesta's emails? Can you tell the American people 1,000% you did not get it from Russia or
Yes.
anybody associated with Russia?
We can say, we have said repeatedly over the last 2 months that our source is not the Russian government and it is not a state party.
There was one report in the Daily Mail that suggested somebody that you are friendly with actually was handed the documents at American University in a wooded area by a disgruntled Democrat who felt betrayed because the revelations showed that Bernie Sanders had been betrayed and they didn't like the corruption of the Clinton Foundation. Can you confirm or deny that? Is that story true?
Well, that statement came from Craig Murray. He
friend of yours?
Friend of mine. He's been here several times. But WikiLeaks is a source protection organization. We are famous for never having exposed one of our sources over 10 years. That's why sources trust us and they come to us. So I can't comment on other people's statements about our sources, except to say what we have said, which is that our sources are not a state party.
Can I ask you this? Have you ever talked to Vladimir Putin?
No.
Have you ever talked to any of his surrogates?
No.
Have you ever talked to Donald Trump?
No.
Any of his surrogates?
No.
Not one?
No.
There was some report that you might have talked to somebody who was not associated with the campaign, Roger Stone.
No, that's false. I think where this Roger Stone claim is coming from is there's a radio guy on WBAI, which is a mutual friend, who wanted to come and see me to see if I would set up a radio show on WBAI, but he didn't. He did come to London, but he didn't meet with me.
So if the U.S. government is accusing WikiLeaks of having received these materials from Russia, and you say it's false, it did not come from Russia, and the President of the United States is advancing the narrative, is the President of the United States lying to the American people?
Well, he's acting like a lawyer. If you look at most of his statements, he doesn't say that. He doesn't say WikiLeaks obtained its information from Russia, worked with Russia.
He's saying Russia's trying to influence the U.S. elections.
Yes. So and you also note that he doesn't say, from the statements that I've read, he doesn't say that Russia was trying to influence the election for Donald Trump. Obama doesn't say that. So you have to be very careful about the lawyerly language that is used to try and conflate different things together. The question is WikiLeaks publications. Okay, true information that the American people took up and they acted accordingly. Was it influential? Did it have a lot of influence? Statistically, yes, it's was the #1 topic on Facebook throughout October. It's the #1 topic on Twitter, political topic, also throughout October. Did it change the outcome? Who knows? It's absolutely impossible to tell. If it did, the accusation is that the true statements of Hillary Clinton and her campaign manager, John Podesta, and the DNC head, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, their true statements is what changed the election.
How do you view yourself? Are you a journalist? Do you view this as reporting that, for example, it's interesting because at one point in the campaign, the New York Times got a hold of Donald Trump's taxes, which, by the way, they obtained illegally, and they published the information. Is there any difference between, you are not going to reveal your source, but nobody has said what you released is not true. They went forward with the story on his taxes. Is there any difference?
There is a difference, which is our material is better presented, less intermediation. The public responded to it more than the New York Times. But the editor of the New York Times, he has come out and said that he would do the same thing as Wikileaks. If they had obtained that information, they would publish it. Now, unfortunately, I don't believe that is true. I believe they would selectively maybe publish just a bit here and a bit there. They would not have done what we did, which is present the American public everything that we knew. Can you just imagine that if WikiLeaks had information about Debbie Wasserman Schultz helping to rig the primary with Bernie Sanders, and we withheld that information until after the election? That would be an absolutely unconscionable act for a media organization to engage in. Unfortunately, those sorts of acts do happen, but not with this organization.
You know, in 2015, the Chinese stole millions of personal documents, classified information on individuals who were seeing it and working for our government, et cetera. So if they don't say anything about China and they selectively choose this, is it to delegitimize Donald Trump? What's your interpretation of that?
It's exactly what it's designed to do. If you look at what the allegations are, they don't mention WikiLeaks for the 29th. They don't mention our publications. Our publications had wide uptake by the American people. They are all true. But that's not the allegation that is being presented by the Obama White House. So why such a dramatic response? Well, the reason is obvious. They're trying to delegitimize the Trump administration as it goes into the White House. They are trying to say that President-elect Trump is not a legitimate president.
Legitimately elected president.
Not a legitimately elected.
If your information...
you watch, they will seize on this and harp on it for the next 4 years. I think that's a mistake. I think that's a mistake not just in fact, that's a mistake for the US Democratic Party. I think it's a stupid maneuver. It's the same reason why they lost the election, which is instead of focusing on substance, they focus on other things which they think are short-term wins, but are not strategic. A little comment by Trump here and there, for example, or this attempt to say that how outrageous it is that the American public receive true information before an election. That the public doesn't buy that. They want as much true information as possible.
If the information you had was about Donald Trump and his campaign, would you have equally released that?
Yes, absolutely. It would be, once again, just think about it from our perspective. We've won a lot of media awards. We have the trust of our sources. We have the trust of our readers, having never got it wrong.
Well, this is an important point. 10 years, not one evidence where you've been proven wrong.
Well, not even one sustained allegation, even. We have a perfect record in relation to authenticating the material that we publish. That's a very valuable reputation to have, and we try and preserve it. So what else do we have a record for? There's no sources coming out through other journalists, say, for example, they can still keep their anonymity. There's no sources coming out and saying, we gave WikiLeaks all this information about Donald Trump or President Xi or Vladimir Putin, and you know what? They didn't publish it.
I know you.
No one has come out and said that. If they did, that would hurt our reputation for trust for our sources.
I know you want to protect your sources, and when you first told me on my radio show that it was not Russia. You said so reluctantly. Can I ask, take it one step further? Can you say that the source was within the United States?
I don't want to constrain whether it was someone inside the United States, in the DNC, in the service providers that provide for the DNC, or outside, etc. I think we have already pushed it quite a lot.
More than you would like.
More than we would like, by saying it's not a state party. That was necessary to do because there was a serious attempt to distract from the content of our publications with this Russian narrative. Now, our sources are interested in two things. They're interested in protecting their identity, but also not going through all that effort and risk to themselves only to have the publication undermined.
Then what do you make of the President of the United States, and Donald Trump may, in the next 24 to 48 hours, contradict with whatever information he's teasing that he does have, but he made a decision to expel 35 Russian diplomats in 2 sites, impose 12 sanctions against the Russian government, and the Russian President Putin responded by inviting children to a Christmas party and said he will wait to deal with the new president. Why would the president, you're saying that Russia did not give you this information. He is very closely suggesting that, in fact, they did, and he's wrong. So my question is, does he know he's wrong? And from your perspective, he has to know.
He's playing games.
He's playing games.
He's playing games.
He's dishonest. Fair? Is he lying to the American people?
He's acting like a lawyer instead of being honest. So he's playing games by trying to suggest that Russia, quote, hacked the election, unquote, pretending that what's going on here is Russia hacking voting machines, for which there is no evidence, then suggesting without saying that our information was part of a plot to get Donald Trump elected. Once again, from our side, which we understand there's no evidence, but even James Clapper and so on coming out and saying, we don't know how WikiLeaks, we don't know when or how WikiLeaks got this information. So it's a construction to try and erect the topic that Donald Trump is illegitimately elected.
More of my exclusive sit-down interview with WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange at the Ecuadorian Embassy in London. I asked him specifically about the FBI and DHS report on 2016 and the election hacking. Let's take a look. The FBI, Department of Homeland Security, this goes to the 29th of December this past year, released a joint report detailing how federal investigations and investigators linked the Russian government to the hacks of the Democratic Party organization. And they gave a 13-page memo. I'm sure you've read it.
I have read it in detail.
At this point. Okay. Supposedly they give technical details regarding tools and some of the infrastructure of the Russian civilian and military intelligence, but they don't give any proof positive.
They give a five-page description of some of the tools that they allege that the Russian state uses. The rest is just fairly boring security recommendations. On the top, there is a disclaimer saying nothing.
I was going to ask you about that.
Guarantee that any of this information is accurate.
Right. It's a guess.
So if it's just, you'll look in the. I used to be a computer security expert. That was my job. This is a bad report, and you look in the rest of the computer security community, you'll see dozens of other computer security experts in the United States, absolutely not affiliated with Russia.
Isn't it contradicted though by our own director of intelligence, national intelligence?
James Clapper.
That's James Clapper.
There's nothing in that report that says that any information was given to us. Nothing. What they have is what they call indicators. So like a way to recognize if these tools, these alleged Russian tools, have been used on your system. Mm-hmm. Okay. So in response to that, some engineer at one of the US electricity companies found this signature on one of their laptops. Okay, so then this was analysed by a wide range of US computer security experts. I've read those reports in detail, and it's discovered this is a commercially available tool produced by Ukraine. So it's straight out of the bat, we either have a deliberate attempt to mislead or thoroughly incompetent work, straight out of the bat. So that story about the laptop at the power generation center, that was picked up by the Washington Post and the administration, pushed everywhere, that here's the Russians infiltrating the electricity grid, and it was completely bogus.
That was bogus. But there's another side of this, which is, I think, pretty fascinating, and that is that Hillary Rodham Clinton had a private server at a mom-and-pop shop in a bathroom closet that I would argue, and other lawyers would make arguments that it was illegal for her to have. From what we understand, the Podesta emails were hacked through a phishing scheme where it said, click on this, give us your information, and he did so. So we made it...
Well, there's a number of hacks of the DNC and Podesta based on the publicly available information. This is not something coming from our sources. We published, as part of our policy of full disclosure, not interfering with the material, we published the several Podesta emails, which shows Podesta responding to a phishing email. Now, how did they respond? Podesta gave out that his password was the word password. His own staff said, this email that you've received, this is totally legitimate. So this is something a 14-year-old kid could have hacked
based on
Podesta that way. In relation to computer security and Hillary Clinton's security, those Secretary of State emails, if you read closely FBI reports and the emails that we released related to Hillary Clinton, you'll see Aberdeen had access to them. A variety of technicians at this very small IT company had access to them. They were shipped through the post in a laptop. She had over a dozen different devices keyed in to have access to them, her iPad, etc. She made almost no attempt to keep them secure from states. Now, was she trying to keep them secure from the Republicans? Well, probably. But in terms of foreign states, almost no attempt.
The reason we have these laws, though, are for transparency, and she wanted to avoid congressional oversight.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's absolutely my interpretation as well. Now, WikiLeaks has been a very strong proponent of the Freedom of Information Act. This is probably actually, if you think about it, probably against our interests as a publisher. But we believe that people have the right to know true information about what the government is doing. Now, the Freedom of Information Act has been subverted. We published Sarah Palin's emails. Why? Because she had, when she was governor of Alaska, she maintained an account that was being used, intentionally or not, to evade the Alaskan Freedom of Information Act. So we published them back in 2008.
And coming up, WikiLeaks exposed how the mainstream media was discussed, how WikiLeaks exposed the rampant collusion between the mainstream media here in America and the Clinton campaign. Let's take a look. I said in my country, Julian, that journalism is dead. I said it in 2008 because I was investigating Barack Obama and his backgrounds and his associations and his career and his lack of knowledge and his radical belief system. And everybody in the media ignored a lot of it. So my question to you then is, now knowing what WikiLeaks revealed about the Podesta emails, on Clinton corruption, on pay-to-play, on Bernie Sanders being cheated, all of this is revealed. Not a lot of it was covered. So what does that say to the American people about media coverage in America? Dishonest?
It's very dishonest, Corrupt is interesting. It depends on your definition. If you look at what we published in the Podesta email,
if they're colluding with Hillary, that's not corrupt.
it's an ethical corruption.
They're not identifying it to their audiences. They claim that they're objective journalists.
It's ethically corrupt. Corrupt by its... Corruption also means something in law, which is that you're taking money in exchange.
Okay.
So I don't think that...
Collusion.
They're colluding, yeah.
Okay, because they share her political agenda. Well, why else would they collude? Or they hate Donald Trump?
I think that's an optimistic interpretation, that they share the political agenda.
Well, explain that.
It's more like you rub my back, I'll rub yours. I'll give you, I'll give you information. You'll come to my, I'll invite you to my child's christening or our next big party, or do you know what I mean? We go to school
or a state dinner.
Yeah. So I think it's more, sadly, I think it's along those lines.
But I look at this list of what WikiLeaks exposed for...
Can I just go back to this media question? What is the line now in the New York Times, MSNBC? Okay. The line is that WikiLeaks changed the result of the election. Okay. And as editor of WikiLeaks, we're quite happy to have the credit for exposing the corruption and behaviour that was occurring in that Clinton team and the DNC fixing things in relation to Bernie Sanders. We're quite happy to accept that.
Was that your motivation? Was your motivation to influence the election, or what is your motivation? Is it fidelity to truth?
My motivation for maybe 20 years, but 10 years with WikiLeaks, has been to publish true information that is otherwise unsayable. So we're not in competition, if you like.
You have no political agenda.
That is a political agenda. We have
expose the government corruption?
It's not a party political agenda. It's a philosophical agenda. We believe that the best type of government comes from a government that is scrutinised by the people when they have true information about how government and major corporations, other power actors in society actually behave.
Let me ask this. As a conservative, one of the things that shocked me about the revelations with WikiLeaks in this election cycle, it drove me crazy for years. The narrative that would be used by the Democrats about conservatives like myself as Republicans are racist, that they're sexist, that they're homophobic, that they're misogynistic, Islamophobic, xenophobic, all those lines are used. And what was fascinating, and not many people wanted to pay attention to it, and I think that's because of the media collusion, is they were exposed as using racial language, being anti-Semitic, homophobic, which led to, on the eve of the Democratic convention, Debbie Wasserman Schultz being fired. That, to me, was the type of thing that you sort of like open a window and things are not often the way they appear. Is this now a new reality going forward in terms of if the media is not going to do their job, there are going to be more WikiLeaks in the future?
Well, I certainly hope so.
And coming up, over the years, Julian Assange. Hannity, so in 2006, Julian Assange founded the group WikiLeaks, and in the years following, he created international controversy and outrage for releasing hundreds of thousands of classified U.S. government documents. Now, many, including myself at the time, had criticized him for doing this, and during our sit-down interview, I asked Assange where WikiLeaks draws the line. Take a look. And I've told you this before, when you first came on the scene in 2010, I was concerned you were waging war against the U.S. I have a comment that I made back in November of 2010, and I said, that other people might be this classified information, releasing classified information. My concern in classified documents could put American lives at risk. That was my concern. So this is what, in the meantime, what you released at that time, the standard operating procedures for Camp Delta, the U.S. Army detention camp at Gitmo. You released a classified video of a series of attacks in Baghdad by a U.S. helicopter that, by the way, killed 12 people and 2 journalists. You also released the Afghanistan war logs. You released the Iraqi war logs. You released U.S. diplomatic cables in November of 2010, the Guantanamo files. You released more U.S. diplomatic cables, released the Syria files leading up to this. Here's my question about this, because I've come to believe that you've done two things that have been extraordinarily helpful to the United States, and I think journalism in a way. One is you showed us that we do not have cybersecurity. You acknowledge that. And two, I think in this election in particular, you exposed a level of corruption that I, for 30 years on the radio as a conservative, knew existed, and I was shocked at the level of corruption, duplicity, dishonesty, manipulation. So there's a lot of good here. Where's a line for you? In other words, if lives are in jeopardy, is that a line? Privacy for individuals, is that a line? If you were to be handed information about a private citizen, a Hollywood actor,
well, let's look at the practice. As editor of Wikileaks, I'm very proud of three things. Number one, we've never got it wrong in terms of what we say a document is, it is.
What you have printed, what you have revealed has never been
shown to be fake, and not even is there any outstanding allegations that it is. Okay. Number two, we have never revealed one of our sources, ever. So that's
Today you can reveal the source of the Podesta emails. That would make a lot of news.
Yeah, and that would be the end of WikiLeaks.
Exactly.
So,
but you did say it's not Russia. And you don't like to say that.
We have in the past occasionally on particular issues where we think that, there's a distraction from the publications that's so severe that we have to kind of distance ourselves from it and prevent a vacuum, basically, being filled by any old rubbish. Okay, so for that. Number three, what are we proud of? We are proud that there's not a single instance of anyone coming to physical harm as a result of our publication.
Let me ask you, have you made conscious decisions as the founder and editor to withhold information because you thought the release of such information would result in somebody's death? In other words, methods.
Where we thought there was a significant risk.
You're very conscious of that.
Yeah.
That's an ethical standard for you.
Yes, and so, but we're always transparent about it, okay?
You'll say that you're not
We say, we're withholding this piece of information for a limited time until such time as we think that there's not a significant risk that someone might face retribution. We're totally transparent about it. So unlike other media organizations, you just see huge redactions with no explanation as to why that information has been redacted or been withheld. And I can tell you that I know from practice, having dealt with more than 110 different media organizations in collaborative partnerships, that very often information is withheld for political reasons, and it is then passed off that it is being withheld in order to protect individuals. So redactions are deeply corrupting. And we are fighting to set a new standard.
You're describing the New York Times. You're describing ABC, NBC, CBS, Politico. You're describing the mainstream media in America. And Wikileaks has shown this.
We had similar problems with The Guardian, Le Monde, El País. Now, there were also fine journalists who did good work. So it's not everyone. But there were critical cases where information that we shared in a partnership agreement under the basis that would only be redacted for human rights reasons, protecting someone's life, was redacted to protect oil companies working in Kazakhstan, or Yulia Tymoshenko, the former leader who's accused of all sorts of murders in Ukraine. So here's the basic problem with censorship. Once again, it creates an opaque system where people can't see what were the reasons for the censorship. In the justice system, we say there must be open justice for there to be justice. The judge while trying, must themselves be tried before the public.
Is it fair to say...
It doesn't happen when a media organization is engaged in just sweeping things under the rug.
Is it fair to say that WikiLeaks is more interested in government corruption that's impacting the lives of people, not superfluous, scandalous lives of big stars?
Yeah, well, we don't publish
it.
We don't publish it.
All right,
I think
let me ask this.
We haven't actually been... I'm not sure we've ever been put in a position where we've had to make that determination.
Because that's not what you do.
Those people goes to TMZ, for example.
And coming up, Julian Assange has knocked Hannity. So back in 2010, Swedish authorities, they issued an arrest warrant for Julian Assange based on 2 separate sexual assault allegations, which ultimately led to Assange seeking asylum at the Ecuadorian embassy in London. I asked Assange about these allegations and more. Take a look.
Let's put this in context. The US case started first in 2010. Okay. The situation where we are today...
These were 2 Swedish women.
The women did not make the allegations. So the state made the allegations. It's agreed in the courts here, all the way up to the Supreme Court, that it's the state of Sweden that brought the case, not the women trying to file charges. There are no charges.
Why would the state do that and not, if the women aren't making the charges and the U.S. case dismissed? You must be confronted by your accuser. Not the case here?
No.
They don't want to...
So they admit in their own filing that the woman said that she was railroaded by the police and others. In the court's material, that the police made up the accusation, and I've already been previously cleared by the chief prosecutor of Stockholm. There are no charges, and twice this year the UN, reviewing the whole situation, has said that I'm illegally detained and I should be immediately released and compensated. Now, as far as the US is concerned, it's a very, very important topic. Okay. The case in the US continues. The Department of Justice continues the whole case.
Even though they said they concluded they will not bring charges?
They didn't. You see, this is the sneaky behavior of this administration. So what as we were complaining, look, the Obama administration is maintaining this massive case against us. It's refusing to release any documents about it to us or any other journalists, erecting a giant dam for all the material involved in the case, saying the reason that no journalist can have access to this is because we are bringing a pending prosecution. This is the end of national security journalism. This is the end of investigative journalism if journalists can't say, hey, we heard a rumor that there was some journalists killed in a drone strike. Do you know anything about that? And maybe a source says, yeah, actually I heard about that as well. And then you go, can you prove it?
But America, if you go back to Woodward and Bernstein, and you go back to Watergate, okay, they had a source. It was called Deep Throat. Big source. It wasn't revealed until the person died.
Under the Obama administration, Deep Throat, that Woodward and Bernstein would have been prosecuted. I have been detained illegally without charge for 6 years in prison, under house arrest, 4.5 years in this embassy, without sunlight, lots of spies everywhere, etc. It's tough. It's tough, but that's the mission that I set myself on. So I'm willing to accept that. I understand the kind of game that's being played with, you know, big powerful actors. They try and take revenge. Okay. It's a different thing for my family. I have young children under 10 years old. They didn't sign up for that. Okay. I'm the type of father that they have. But they didn't sign up for that. And that's not something I like. And I think that is fundamentally unjust outcome for my children. It's not a good precedent for other people to have as well. But that would be my one concern. I know what I'm doing. I'm prepared to have wear the consequences of the conflict and dealing with powerful groups and individuals. But my family is innocent in that equation. You know? They didn't sign up for that fight. We published several Podesta emails which shows Podesta responding to a phishing email. Now, how did they respond? Podesta gave out that his password was the word password. His own staff said, this email that you've received, this is totally legitimate. So this is something a 14-year-old kid could have hacked
based on
Podesta that way.
Sad we don't have cybersecurity. Now, that was Julian Assange talking about the lack of security that plagued the Clinton campaign. Now, following my one-on-one exclusive interview with the Wikileaks founder, President-elect Trump, he tweeted out, quote, Julian Assange said a 14-year-old could have hacked Podesta, so why was the DNC so careless? He also said Russians did not give him the information. We continue with former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich, a Fox News contributor. You told me you watched the interview. I wish I had the time to air more. We have at least 40 minutes more. We'll air some of that tonight. What were your general thoughts? Because when we asked the audience after the show what they thought, whether they believed Assange or Obama and Hillary, the majority, vast, overwhelming majority, believed Assange. What are your thoughts?
Well, let me say, first of all, I think what you did is so fascinating, and Assange is such a down-to-earth, straightforward interviewer or interviewee. You begin to realize we don't have cybersecurity for much of what we're doing. We're way behind the curve in what we have to learn how to do if we're going to function as a society. And I think in that sense, this is a very revealing interview. Second, the idea that a 14-year-old could have done it, but it was the Russians, tells you how desperate Obama and the Democrats are to find some excuse to discredit Donald J. Trump, because they can't stand the idea that he won because Hillary was so bad, because the Obama record was so bad, and because the American people were tired of radical policies that don't work. So they've, in some ways, they've trumped this whole thing up, to use a phrase, in order to try to discredit the president-elect.
And that's the amazing thing here. Now, whether you like Julian Assange or not, he's really committed his life to this work, answered unequivocally, spoken to his surrogates, never spoken to Trump or surrogates. And when I asked him, I said, well, what if the information was about Donald Trump? Would you have released it? And his answer was absolutely, positively yes. Now, when you look at what they exposed about the DNC, and you look at what we learned about the collusion with the news media and the Clinton campaign, I've got to believe that this is more trustworthy information than anything we're getting from the New York Times or Politico or NBC or CBS or ABC. Is that a stretch to say something?
Well, no, look, I think one of the great sad things about the last 8 years is the degree to which the Obama administration has corrupted the intelligence community and has led to people just not believing the Director of National Intelligence, not believing the head of the CIA. And similarly, when the elite media decided they were in the tank for Hillary Clinton, that they were going to go all out in a one-sided effort, they actually broke the country's faith that they had anything to do with the news. They became propaganda instruments, not news instruments. And the result is people are more likely to believe watching an interview for 40 minutes than they are to believe, the so-called wise men of the New York Times. And that's a real drop in institutional confidence in this country. And in the long run, it's dangerous for the country to have people who can't trust their government, can't trust their news media. It's one of the things that President Trump is going to have to correct. And this is part of why I think his tweeting is important. You're getting an authentic Trump, whether he's right or wrong sometimes, whether it's occasionally things he shouldn't say. The act of being that direct, that open, having people see who he authentically is, I think helps rebuild faith in the system.
I think the collusion between the media and the Clinton campaign was so over-the-top egregious. I don't think if that trust will ever be rebuilt. But by the way, Chuck Todd over at NBC thinks they did a great job. He was patting himself on the back. Tonight, right here on Hannity. What would your advice to the incoming president, the president-elect, Donald Trump, be?
I think it's to learn from that, to learn from the mistakes that were committed by Hillary Clinton, learn from the mistakes of Barack Obama, especially in this area of transparency.
All right, when we come back, more of my exclusive interview with the Wikileaks founder, Julian Assange. That's right after this break, and much more straight ahead. Hannity, so during my exclusive sit-down interview with Wikileaks founder Julian Assange in London earlier this week, I asked him what advice he would give President Obama, Hillary Clinton, and President-elect Trump. Well, here's what he had to say. What's your message at the end of this election and this process and hearing Hillary blame Wikileaks, James Comey for her election loss? What's your message to Hillary Clinton?
Well, I don't think Hillary Clinton is particularly important anymore, but the Democratic Party is important. It's important to have a strong opposition. And the Democratic Party now has a moment where it can go through a reformation, but it can only go through that reformation if it looks at the genuine reasons for the loss. The genuine reasons, to my mind, for the loss is because the rigging of the primary process. They didn't pick the strongest candidate. So there's an internal market, which is the primary process. You battle it out with the different contenders, and the idea is that the strongest candidate is what you then send off into the main election. That didn't happen. Why didn't it happen? Because the DNC...
It was rigged.
The DNC no longer represented the genuine interests of the Democratic Party. And that's the problem. So my message to the US Democratic Party is now is a moment for reformation and for renewal of the Democratic Party. Take the information that we have published, which shows who the different players are and how they work within the DNC.
Learn from it.
Clinton. Learn from it and reform. And because every government has to have a strong opposition to keep it efficient, accountable, honest, etc.
Let me ask about your message to Barack Obama through this prism. He's now joined the ranks of blaming WikiLeaks and Russia and hacking for having an influence in the election, meanwhile ignoring the documents from China, his own attempt to influence the Israeli election. But what would your message to him be?
Well, there is a documented attempt to interfere with the election. We published it, which is the rigging of the primary process.
What an irony, right?
Yeah.
There's the proof, but he's not focused on that.
Right. Barack Obama, as if you like, as an elder statesman, he should be helping this reformation in the Democratic Party. That should be his natural position. And to do that properly, he has to be seen as someone who's independent and trustworthy by the Democratic
An elder
base.
statesman.
He has to pull away entirely from that Hillary Clinton network. Pull away entirely, say this was a problem, we've got to learn from it. He's not saying that, and I think it's just a terrible thing for the Democratic Party that he isn't. And frankly, it's not good for him either. He needs to be seen now as someone that's above all that he's above the fray. He's a fair arbitrator of the different factions.
What would your advice to the incoming president, the president-elect, Donald Trump, be?
I think it's to learn from that, to learn from the mistakes that were committed by Hillary Clinton, learn from the mistakes of Barack Obama, especially in this area of transparency. If you can get the information out as soon as possible, then you can correct as soon as possible. So I think that Donald Trump, early on in his administration, he needs to set a standard. He needs to go to someone in that cabinet. Okay, you're a friend, maybe even ally, but you did the wrong thing here by the American people, so you're fired. And that standard needs to be set early, that no one is immune to the
and he can
to betraying their role.
He can be honest, transparent, and forthright without using the media too, which has been proven to be hostile.
Well, I think that's a good thing. I think it's a good thing that he's seeing that he can go straight to the public and not have to massage the interests of media proprietors who have many different interests, or the journalistic class, which has other interests as well.
Very few people in the media, and there was even one major national news organization that were willing to cover the depth of what WikiLeaks revealed, what these emails revealed, what were the contents of these emails. Now, I have, for example, a lot of the major headlines. You know, you've got the collusion between media organizations, giving Hillary Clinton questions ahead of time, asking for questions that they can ask Republicans in a particular campaign. They're up to their eyeballs.
They're giving Donna Brazile
Donna
debate
Brazile is one.
questions.
John Hartwood is another. Katie Couric offering to showcase her personality. In other words, a fluff piece for her. And it goes further than that. Reuters, you know, then you have the New York Times and Politico. And they are literally giving them editing opportunities before an article is published. I've been interviewed by both those publications, and I can assure you that's never happened to me in my life, nor do I think that same consideration was given to Donald Trump.